Welcome, everybody. This is KARL-JAMES Langford, and this is Tales from the Crypt. This is the first one we've actually done, and I hope that the stories tonight will prepare you for Halloween. And to all the spirits out there, this candle carries the souls of many spirits. Do you know what one person said to me once? You shouldn't blow out a candle. You should let the candle burn, but let's blow away these spirits. So now we begin. So before the days of radio and television, families would gather around the fire, and as shadows leapt across darkened rooms and tree branches snapped against the window shutters, they would terrify each other with stories of hauntings, headless horsemen, and mist-filled hollows. Sometimes these stories are a little more than just stories. So I've decided today to take a little look at some actual reports, whether they be murders, actual sightings, or stories of great tragedy. We start off with one of 5 stories this evening. It's a story that was first reported in the media on the 1st of November, 1878, of a trial that took place on the 31st of October, 1878. So this story is very, very relevant. And as you will see, this story is about a brutal murder in a very peaceful part of our wonderful land. It starts as follows. Joseph Garcia was released from prison, a Spanish gentleman who ended up in the small village of Langibi near Usk. Back then, the county was called Monmouthshire. The year was 1878. It was in the summer, a beautiful sunny July day of the 16th. And then by the following day, the 16th day of July would be synonymous with the village of Langibi. Garcia had just been released from Usk prison, a sailor by trade. On his release, he had dressed in his attire associated with being a sailor. The warder of the jail at Usk had collected some money together for Garcia. This money would be used by Garcia to aid his journey to Newport, where he would meet a ship and go home to his beloved Spain. But before the warder could get to Garcia to give him the collection, Garcia had already walked out the gates. He was now free, but he wouldn't be free for long. Garcia headed on that fateful Tuesday towards the village of Langibi, out of the gates of Usk jail. Talking in the first person, I had seen him on the road from Usk. The road from Usk heading for Newport. I had seen him on the side of the road, at which point there was a stile. Garcia was looking around, particularly at the stile and towards a house. Why had he been doing this? The stile was, I later found, to be 100 yards from a labourer's cottage, a labourer known as William Watkins. William Watkins had lived in this house with his beautiful wife, Elizabeth, and their 3 children, Charlotte, Frederick, and Alice. Charlotte had been the oldest on the 16th of July, 1878, at the age of 10. The stile was after the cottage, and Garcia seemed to be heading for Newport. Personally, I was rushing to get home, for it was now 11 a.m. to get a bite to eat. It'd been a hard day. For on heading back that way for Usk, Garcia was still at the stile. He wasn't upright. I looked at him and I could see pure evil. The look on his face at around 4 p.m. As I would later find out, the face of a killer to be. He now slept before his deed. What actually happened that day is thus. There had been a knock on the door. And the person knocking the door of the cottage, the labourer's cottage, William Watkins's house and his family. William Watkins opened the door and there in front of him was Garcia. Elizabeth Watkins had been baking bread in the kitchen, and the 3 children played freely in the house. To William, Garcia, freshly released from Usk jail, seemed to be extremely well dressed in a clean shirt, a clean pair of trousers, a blue smock, jersey, and he wore an old pair of blucher boots. He had the attire of a sailor, but these were clothes of somebody that looked after himself. The true reality is, on being released from jails those days, the clothes were freshly washed and pressed. On release of the individual, they looked smart and presentable to go back into society. To William, Garcia didn't look like a prisoner, and so invited him into his house, into his home, to meet his family. They all ate together, and after all, it was now dinner time. And in ascertaining Garcia was a Spanish sailor, Elizabeth couldn't stop herself. She was very pleased to show Garcia her inheritance of 5 gold Spanish coins. Coins of the old Main, you could say. Now this had been a grave mistake for Elizabeth and her family. For now Garcia wished to obtain those coins. And as I feel the hairs going up on the back of my neck, can you guess what happens next?
Yep.
as Elizabeth and William Watkins had been distracted by their children happily at play, Garcia obtained those coins and ran from the house. He was to be followed by William Watkins. A brutal fight ensued, and the terrible thing happened. Garcia couldn't stop himself. He pulled out a knife and stabbed at Williams directly into his throat. It was almost instantly that Williams was to die. Withdrawing the knife, Garcia then panicked to hear Mr. Watkins's wife, Elizabeth, trying to intervene, but to no avail. It was too late for her husband. As William collapsed to the ground with his face lying in the bed of flowers, he gasped for breath and then he died. Elizabeth screamed for help, and her children ran into the garden. They all screamed as they saw their dad dead in the flower bed. Then Elizabeth was set upon. Her throat was now cut by the same blade that had killed her husband. She was murdered in front of her 3 children. But folks, it gets worse. Now the turn of the children, Garcia was thinking. Yes, let's kill them, as for they are the 3 witnesses that will see me hung, Garcia thought. Garcia screeched and screamed and ran after the children into the cottage through the open door. Chasing the children upstairs, the children tried to bar the door of their bedroom. The eldest girl of 10, Charlotte, hid under the bed. For now, the other 2 children lay under the bed covers. Garcia could see them moving under the bed covers. There was at least 2 children there. Garcia set upon them, stabbing and stabbing and stabbing and stabbing, and he couldn't stop, as happens when you kill. But he could hear sobbing. There was a 3rd child. He knew there was 3 children, but he thought he'd killed them all. Where was this little girl? Little girl, little girl, Garcia called after her. And there she was, under the bed, petrified, terrified. Did she cry out and beg? Garcia, don't kill me. But it was her time. She had seen her parents killed, heard her sister of 4 years old, Alice, who was now dead, and Frederick, her brother of 5, now murdered. It was her turn. Garcia felt she was next, the 5th. The girl was stabbed at. He stabbed the knife under the bed. He kept stabbing until suddenly she now lay dead. Did Garcia get away with this? No. But nor did the 5 people he had murdered that day, on that fateful 16th of July, 1878. This all came to trial on the 31st of October. Quite ironic that. Then the next day. What awaited James the next day, a workmate of William, was a sight of pure carnage. He entered the garden through the gate, saw his friend William face down in the flower bed. His friend, his colleague. What do you do when you see a friend and a colleague dead? James ran, screamed, cried out. He went to get help. The help that he obtained was from two others in the village. A man called Day. This would certainly make his day, wouldn't it? Quite ironic, really. And then Yanto. Day, Yanto, and James took to enter the house, now filled with smoke and the smell of burning sulfur. This was the place of hell, the place they didn't want to enter. Where were the children? Oh, the mother was also dead. They couldn't enter the house. It was intoxicating. Then the story alters slightly. Instead of entering the house, Day went to get his ladder, put it up against the side of the building, removed some slates off the roof, and then looked down into where the children were. Is there something not quite right about this story? This is all based on what was reported in the court. Apparently, he removed tiles so that the smoke would exit through the roof. As Day looked down and then asked Yanto to look down, they looked into the children's room. The children lay smouldering on their bed. 1, 2. Garcia apparently had lit 3 fires to cover for his crime. The fires didn't engulf the house. The men entered the house to place out the fires with great risk to themselves. The one fire in the bedroom was still smouldering, and so were the young bodies. The bodies had almost turned to charcoal. But James knew there were 3 children. He called out, "Elizabeth." Where would a child hide? She was found under the bed a little later. They did search for her. She was under the bed, as we know. Evil Garcia was found a few days later, now in Newport, at the train station with 2 bundles. One of his, they'd been given his effects from the prison as he left on the 16th, and another belonging to the Watkins family, and the importance of that loaf of bread. That loaf of bread hung Garcia. It was the loaf of bread that Elizabeth had been baking that morning. The impressions on it had been made by the bake tin used in that house of the 16th of July, 1878. Bloodstains had been found on that once clean shirt that morning, nicely washed and pressed by the ladies of Usk. On the 31st of October, Garcia was sentenced to hang at Usk jail a few days later. Garcia would never leave the jail. He would be forever haunting the place. But strangely enough, some say Garcia did not commit this crime. Only his ghost will tell. Next, next. A more poetic story. Nant Gor Therin. Story of the wedding guest, Gwestai Priodas. Nant Gor Therin is on the north coast of the Llŷn Peninsula, Gwynedd. And the story takes us around 200 years ago. The story of Rhys and Menhir. The location is Ir Eifl, is a rocky-looking mountain, one of many mountain chains in North Wales. It has 3 summits. One has the Iron Age settlement on it called Trier Kerry, a place nearly 1,600 feet up, not a place you would wish to go to in the daylight. Rather than at night would you either wish to go. On the west side of the mountain is a small valley that leads down to the sea called Nant Gor Therin, a place that once used to be involved in quarrying, a former quarrying village. Myths and legends about. And as we relax, we look at the story of Rhys Menhir. Rhys and Menhir. A boy and girl in love from childhood, always destined to be married. Childhood sweethearts. They used to meet under an old hollow oak tree on the slopes of Ir Ewyll. It took them a while to realize what they felt for many, many years was actual true love. Rhys and Menhir decided that the day would come that they would marry. Marriage was the next step anyone would take in a perfect relationship back in those days. Everyone in the village realized they were a perfect match. The villagers and the loving couple prepared for the big day. The mountain called the couple. Come to me, the mountain called, as it would forever. The day before the lovers, Rhys and Menhir, were to be wed. The neighbours, childhood friends and family were all invited to Nant Gor Therin. Many gifts were bestowed upon them, gifts that the couple could use for the rest of their lives. So, and so again, this happy day came. So much hope and joy was thought of this day. Nothing could go wrong, absolutely nothing. They would eventually be found together. The residents of Nant Gor Therin still followed a tradition called the wedding guest back 200 years ago. Nobody really took to this tradition again the day after. The day after that. Fateful wedding day. The tradition once had it that on the morning of the wedding, the bride must run and hide, as brides do. Hide where? This was all for fun, a tradition. Traditions never go wrong, do they? Menhir hid in the most likely place. The most likely place. But in entering this place, broke her ankle and she became unconscious with the shock. Where was this place that she went to? Can you guess? The day of the wedding began and the guests gathered in the church, all except for Rhys and some of his friends. his best men. Really? The very best searchers. Were they the best? They all went to play as if children, again to find Menhir. They had been tipped off by a quarryman who had spotted Menhir heading into the hills. But they searched. Menhir called out, "Where are you?" They all called out. The mist came up. There was no sign of her, no voice, no nothing, just mist. It's the mist. She was gone. The boys started to joke with Rhys. Menhir had taken off with a quarryman. She had gone. She didn't want to marry you at all, Rhys. How cruel boys can be. Rhys naturally became very upset. Where was Menhir? By dusk, the wedding had been called off. He was distraught. But Rhys's friends rallied around him, and they resumed the search the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the day after that. And they said to Rhys, she must have gone off somewhere. She's not dead, Rhys. Maybe she did go off with a quarryman. But be thankful in the knowledge that she's still alive. She was still alive at that point. Rhys then alone kept searching for Menhir. I know the pain myself that he was feeling, searching for a lover that you would never find. He did not want to give up. He called, he screamed, "Menhir, where are you? Menhir," and he searched for many days. He would sit down at their favorite oak tree and he would talk to her in the night, as we talk to people who are not there. She was there. Sometimes he felt he could hear her heartbeat, but she couldn't be here, could she? How could he hear and sense her near? How could she be near? His friends felt Rhys was losing his mind. One night 200 years ago, in the depths of winter, Rhys went searching again. On a stormy night, he wandered the hills one more time. The last time. Only to end up at their favorite oak tree and sat down beneath it for a while. He felt safe there. He felt if there was any place in the world, this is where Menhir would be. And he felt she wasn't dead. She couldn't be dead. There was a stormy sky, thunder, lightning. He still felt safe under this tree until a lightning bolt struck the old oak tree. It hit the tree. And it was such a shock for Rhys. He looked out at the landscape. The oak tree is split right in half. He could see nothing there. It was smoldering. It was misty. He couldn't really make anything out, but he could smell something very odd. Couldn't see anything there at this stage, but could smell something very odd. The smell of burning hair. Unusually felt strange. and he decided to examine the tree that was now in half. He felt it could have been a sheep or a goat dead in there, but it wasn't at all. And to his horror, as he examined the tree trunk, he saw the decomposing body, not of a man, not of any normal woman, but he now saw the hair of his beloved Menhir. Her wedding gown was still of the silk that she was married, that she's going to be married in. But now the silk was starting to smolder. As he cried out, Menhir, Menhir, my love, my true love, is this you? He had finally found his one and only true love, Menhir. How would you react with this? How would anyone react with this? Rhys screamed, and it is said the echo of his scream could still be heard on a misty night at Nant Gwrtherin. Overwhelmed, you would be, all of us would be. Choked with regret, he would have been. He should have known she would be here. So now he blamed himself. In shock, it said Rhys collapsed to the ground. And as he collapsed to the ground, he headed over to his bride and died in her now skeletal arms. United in death, that is the best that we must say about this story. But it doesn't end there. Could we think that the couple finally felt at rest? They never did get married, and the ghosts of Rhys and Menhir are seen as holding hands on the beach. Many visitors to the area have seen them. A couple wandering hand in hand along the beach. If you should ever see them, remember to take a book of vows with you so that you can declare them married. In do so, releasing them from their torment. I declare Rhys and Menhir man and wife, and then the both of them can truly rest. In researching these stories, we came across a very strange one, if those are not strange that you've heard already. And we look to the story, the mystery of Billy Parrock. In the 1850s, with no investigation at the time, a gentleman called Billy Parrock disappeared. It was a sunny night. Billy Parrock had gone to the Leys public house at Jarlston, Aberthaw, in what we now know as the Vale of Glamorgan. He was due to go to sea in his vessel called the Old Picton. On a Sunday at the Leys public house, you could get drunk any time of the day. Billy had drunk some beers. He wasn't intoxicated and informed the publican and others he was going to sea. It was a small vessel called the Old Picton, the type of boat being a smack. It was always presumed Billy Parrock had gone to sea. Footprints, his own footprints, had been found in the mud at the makeshift quay on the pebbles at Jarlston, Aberthaw. Billy was never seen again. Well, Billy was never ever seen again in the flesh. He did not return, or had he gone at all. The next day, there had been a hue and cry, and the legendary Llantwit Major boys came over to search the shore. Mile after mile they searched. Nothing was found, not even the boat. The old Picton, the old fishing smack. Where had that gone? Over 50 years later, in 1906, a certain William Thomas of Elm Cottage, St. Athens, said of Billy Parrock. Billy Parrock had been well thought of, a bachelor, and stated it was always known that Billy Parrock had been murdered. But there was not a scrap nor a scrip of the man to be found anywhere 50 odd years previous. It had been a Sunday night in the latter part of the year. He was never seen again, except for on the 22nd of September 1906, headline news: Aberthorpe skeleton buried in sand and pebbles found. It was believed that these are the mortal remains of Billy Parrock. So many people remembered the events of 50 years earlier and reported this so. Billy Parrock, known as William David of Parrock near Boverton, was also a labourer of a Mr. D. Davis of Battersley Farm. That night, 50 years previous, Billy Parrock was meant to be on board the old Picton, but where were the rest of his crew? I didn't find the answer to that. They were meant to be travelling with limestone to Cardiff, collected at Aberthorpe. Another strange fact of the time was that Billy Parrock disappeared with no investigation. There were police at the time, but the point of fact, there was only one police officer in Cowbridge. They chose not to investigate. This is where the story takes another direction. Billy Parrock had a sister. Later she married. She's known as Mrs. Gould. She dreamt one night that she saw him buried in the sand and pebbles on the shore. The family all put their mind onto it in the daytime and dreamt about it at night. I suppose, and they insisted upon saying that he was buried in the sand. And with this, the locals started to wonder. So this led the Lantwit Major and the St. Athan boys to dig into the sand dumps, but without any trace. The two groups of boys would compete to try and find Billy, a macabre Sunday afternoon sport. All of this was based on the dream of his sister. The boys from St. Athan and Lantwit Major would quarrel in the Lays public house afterwards. It was a common thing for Lantwit Major boys to state that if they had been blamed, they would not have buried a man in the sand. It was not their way. There is a ghost, the Lays ghost. There's been a lot of talk about the Lays ghost over the years. And one gentleman said, "Oh, aye, many times men on the boats were afraid to go on deck at the Lays in the night because they said they had seen the ghost of a man with his head off." And sailors, very superstitious men, chose to avoid going on deck at night when they were at the Lays. To finish this story, a Mr. John Deere in 1906, a very well-known Lantwit Major family, tells us at the age of 74, he said that in the 1850s, Billy Parrock had been murdered. He said, "I knew Billy well. He was a fine, broad set of a man, about 6 foot in height. And he was engaged in farming, in driving the oxen. And it was said at the time that whoever killed him must have set the boat adrift and must have been a very powerful man indeed to have killed Billy. The boat was set adrift, it's thought, in order to allay any suspicion. However, we don't know anything more than that. There are lots of unanswered questions in lots of these stories, if I may say so. So the next story I would like to look at is a story that comes directly from Mary Trevelyan. And then we have one more story about Merthyr Mawr, which we will end on. So if everyone can get a little bit more relaxed, here we go. Roger Merrick's Ride, a folk story about Tinkinswood in the Vale of Glamorgan. Long stretches of purple heather fringe the brown moorland pools, around which yellow marsh marigolds bloom in profusion in the spring, and tall golden irises hold their heads aloft in the early summer. It was a glorious evening. The mellow radiance of the autumnal sunset glowed in the western sky, lighting up for a brief time the darkest corners and gilding the tarnished livery of the woodlands. To the south, the Severn Sea was almost lost in the golden haze, through which the steep home loomed like a fairy fortress or a lonely dream island where one could forget the bitter past and conjure up a mystical future that should atone for the uncertain present. Here and there on the sea, the ships looked like phantoms gliding to or from unknown havens, and the little skiffs sailed lazily along like a fairy flotilla bound for the island of Hesperides. To the west, embowered in woodlands, is the Vale of Worship, dotted here and there by hoary and mossy grown druidic stones, beyond which stands the largest cromlech in all Britain. Looking from the high moorland, the surrounding country appeared like a fairy realm stretching towards the region of the setting sun. On the outskirts of the moorland, a few straggling cottages remained in the days of which I write, and in one of these lived an old woman known as Mary of the Downs. Waste common land, moorland, and unenclosed heaths are frequently called the Downs in Wales. Mary lived on St. Lythans Down near St. Nicholas in the Vale of Glamorgan. She retained a bright intellect and could thread her needle without the aid of glasses at the age of 93. And even then remembered all the old oak stories that were told in her childhood. In her quaint Anglo-Cymraeg, she would tell us tales of her grandmother and all the traditions and nursery stories handed orally down from generation to another. She remembered minsters and pious men coming long distances to lay ghosts, and she was perfectly certain her great-grandmother was a friend of the little people. As the fairies are sometimes called in Wales, the Tylwyth Teg and the Bendith and Mamai had visited Cogan Pile in her own childhood, and she had been fairy-led in a field near Wenvo Castle when quite a grown woman. She had also found strange small silver in her own new tin money box before anyone had placed a contribution therein. Mary would not have it that her mother had possibly put some small silver in the box for luck's sake. Seated in her armchair beside the glowing fire, Mary would tell her stories as long as anybody cared to listen, and many pleasant hours could be whiled away in the woman's company. Her language was not polished, and sometimes it became confused, but she was one of the last of the old Welsh storytellers. The bards of old, you could call her. The last of a generation that has seen its day and is lost in the peaceful past. Did you ever hear the story of Castell Carrig? Asked Mary. I told her I had heard much about the celebrated cromlech and others of its kind in the neighbourhood. Oh, 'tis nothing about the druids and bards, said she. 'Tis a story my great-grandmother used to tell my grandfather. Mary related the story in her old fashion, and I have woven it to thus. And actually, this is a story by the wonderful Mary Trevelyan, written in the end of the 1800s. Although nearly 5 years had passed since this terrible Battle of St. Fagans was fought, 1648. The conflict was still cruelly fresh in the people's memory, and many lamented the loss of relatives and friends as if they had just been severed from them. In the lowest end of the druidical vale of worship, a small farmhouse called Northcliffe nestles under the trees in a veritable sleepy hollow. Away beyond it, broad meadowland stretched from the mill of Dyffryn to that of Litmore, both in full walking order in the days of Cromwell. On the heights above Northcliffe stood Sutton, then a quaint old Tudor-built house. Now it is an ordinary farm. Even in the present days of toil and traffic, Northcliffe is secluded. Still in the stream that flows through the mill meadows, otters are to be seen, and still in the orchards the nightingales sing as though the world was in its youth. Roger Merrick of Northcliffe was a rich man before Cromwell scoured the country, but afterwards he found it difficult to make ends meet. Again, 5 years after the Battle of St. Fagans of 1648. He had lost 2 sons in the Battle of St. Fagans, and one of them had left a widow and children, the care of whom fell to Roger. Another son named Cyril was taken prisoner and still remained in exile. Late in the autumn into the 1650s, 5 years after the battle, Roger Merrick took the path through the fields in the Vale of Worship and passed Castell Carrig on his way to the village of St. Nicholas. He had many calls to make, and twilight was deepening into night when he started to walk home again, this time by way of the road. Autumn leaves fluttered silently downwards into one of the most beautiful roadways in South Wales. Broad margins of grass are on each side of the thoroughfare, and under stately and ancient oaks and elms, a sparkling brook glides onward to the valley below. Hoary oaks that have stood the storms of centuries crown each upland, and groves of the same venerable trees still remain where once the Druids worshipped. As Roger Merrick went past the manor house St. Nicholas, where chestnut trees form a dense canopy even in the daytime and make the roadway as dark as night, early in the evening a man accosted him. "It is dark hereabouts," said the man. "That it is," replied Roger. "But who may you be?" "Who know my voice, don't you?" asked the stranger. "I can't say that I do," replied Roger. Don't you remember Miles Button of Sheepcote? Asked the stranger. I do. He was taken prisoner at the Battle of St. Fagans. Yes, and he had a son named Morgan, said the stranger. I remember, said Roger, sighing deeply. Poor fellow, he was killed in the great battle. Was he? Curiously asked the stranger. To be sure he was, said Roger sorrowfully. No, no, said the man decisively. Well, if he wasn't killed, why didn't he come home when 'twas safe for him to do so? 'Tis gone 5 years since that terrible battle. Roger sighed deeply and tears filled his eyes. Morgan Button escaped, said the stranger hurriedly. He went abroad and returned. When did he come back? Asked Roger. The last week in October, replied the man. I've not heard a word about it, said Roger, somewhat tartedly. You may not have heard the news, said the stranger. But he's come from all that in any ways. Just then the man emerged out of the dense shadows into the twilight, and immediately Roger Merrick recognized his companion. Well, indeed, exclaimed Roger. Sure enough, 'tis Morgan Button himself, overjoyed. But what do you come this way for? Why don't you go to Sheepcote? To tell the truth, said Morgan, lowering his voice, I want to keep out of the way for a bit. My father is home, and I've been a bad boy, spent too much money, and he's angered about it. My mother asked me to keep away from the house for a few weeks. And where may you be staying? Asked Roger. With the Tinkinswood people. Oh, with the Powells. The same. The men walked slowly on in the growing darkness until they reached the little bridge, spanning the brook and leading to the farmhouse known as Tinkinswood, close beside Castell Carreg. Morgan talked much about his escape after the Battle of St. Fagans and of his doings whilst abroad, and time seemed to fly. So pleasant was the conversation, the men lingered on the bridge until nightfall, and then Roger was loath to wander. Come up with me to the house, said Morgan. 'Tis early yet. Well, to be sure, said Roger. I think I will. It can't be long after 6 by the light. At Tinkinswood, Roger was warmly welcomed. The inmates were hospitable people, and soon Powell the elder, Morgan Button, and Roger Merrick were regaling themselves with cakes and Curudha beer. In the midst of their rejoicing, loud knocking was heard at the door. A stranger begged permission to rest a while, for the night was dark, and he had come a long distance. Come in, said John Powell, throwing the door open. In strode a tall young man dressed in the fashion of the period. I have tethered my horse to a tree in yonder yard, said the strange visitor. John Powell directed his men to see to the animal and led the way to the kitchen. Roger Merrick could scarcely believe his own eyes there in front of him with his youngest son, who he hadn't seen for 5 whole years. My son, exclaimed Roger. My son returned from exile. Cyril warmly returned his father's embraces and his friends' hearty greetings. Then they all sat down and talked and quaffed large tankards filled with foaming nut brown ale. Story after story was told. Story of the battle, story of this, stories of adventure. All were told, and the night was growing. Morgan Button quaffed the foaming ale and related his experiences abroad. Cyril Merrick also heartily quaffed the ale and talked much about his adventures, while John Powell and Roger Merrick listened long and earnestly. The hours flew like fleet-winged birds before a hurricane. It was 11 o'clock, and Roger said he must go, but Morgan Button and Cyril Merrick urged him to remain. "If you'll stay another hour," said Cyril, son of our wonderful Roger Merrick, "you shall have my horse. I'll stay here, and you can go home and prepare mother for my homecoming." What a kind and thoughtful son. Roger mounted on a swift horse and would be home, he felt, in no time. It mattered little if he remained another hour. Again and again, they quaffed back those tankards, the foaming nut-brown ale, and it was almost as if this was the greatest moment in Mr. Merrick's life. It was midnight. Still one more story, then Roger Merrick must go. It was an hour later when he mounted his son's horse and had the reins put in his hands by his exiled son. "See you soon, Dad." The knowledge was too good to be true. How the kind wife at home would rejoice. "For this my son that was lost is found again," he said. "Cyril, my boy, what is the horse's name?" "Firefly, Dad." "He's fleet-footed, but quite safe," said Cyril Merrick. Then Cyril lighted the small saddle lantern, which he always used when riding in the dark. "Good night to you all." "Good night," responded the other man. Down through the darkness and the narrow lane leading to the road went Roger. He was careful. Just going along the track, he had to be careful, for the lane was rough and the horse was strange to those parts. Presently, he reached the road leading from St. Nicholas towards Dufferin. At first, the horse went almost too slowly, but once on the good road, it went at better speed. By and by, it quickened its pace, and when Roger turned into the road leading from St. Lythans, Firefly was going positively fast. "It's a good horse," remarked Roger, stroking its head. "It's a good horse." Soon afterwards, he thought the horse went just a little too fast. Firefly struck its hoof sharply upon the rocky road. That was enough. Firefly started at a racehorse speed, and the hands of the rider could not check him. On and on went the horse and the rider as though to win a wager. Roger Merrick used every effort to restrain Cyril's horse, but failed. Although the night was dark, very dark, and the road strange to the horse, and the animal raced and raced and raced, Roger Merrick felt as though he were being carried off into a whirlwind. Northcliffe was passed. Sutton was reached. "Oh, there's my home," and still on and on through the darkness and the night went Firefly. Uphill, down dale, clattering through villages, silent as a grave, bounding over brooks, dashing past lonely churchyards where the dead slept oblivious of everything. And surmounting every obstacle, Firefly raced as if lives were at stake. Roger's brain whirled. He was almost too giddy to wonder how and where the race would end. What a terrible ride! He could never forget it, never. He longed for the first light of dawn to reveal where they were. At last it came. A rift appeared in the grey November clouds, and Roger had sufficient light to see that they were on the Golden Mile near Bridgend, and many, many miles away from home. Firefly slackened its pace for a moment, during which time Roger Merrick was able to turn the horse's head. but the next minute the animal was careering as madly as ever. "The animal is surely bewitched, bewitched it is," muttered Roger as he heard the people in the village shouting, "A runaway! A runaway! A runaway!" The race was fearful. The noise of the people along the thoroughfare became deafening. Clatter, clatter went the horses' hooves upon the road. Rattle and whiz went the whirlwind around Roger's ears as the bewitched horse raced along. Suddenly the cock crew and the horse stopped. Roger Merrick rubbed his eyes and he found himself at Casteth Carrig, Tinkinswood Chamber. The bewitched horse! Roger felt himself at the fallen cromlech. That's where he was seated. The ride was merely a dream, engineered by copious draughts of Welshman's beloved Cwrwdda beer. Roger Merrick went home a sorrowful man, but a wiser man. And when he told his wife the story of Firefly, she recanted and said, "That will teach thee a lesson to come home straight instead of going to sleep at Casteth Carrig. How dare you, Roger?" A year later, the exiled son, Cyril, returned home. But Morgan Button's fate remains a mystery to this day. Early in the last century, it was a folk remark in that neighborhood when a man went to market to warn him to take care thee dost not go for a ride round Casteth Carrig on thy way home. And finally, folks, we have the last story of the evening. The year is 1810. It is Merthyr Mawr, and the month is October. The day is the 31st. A rich gentleman entered the new inn, just alongside the River Ogmore and the back entrance to his estate. "I want to talk to Mr. Koch," he proclaims. The lady behind the counter at the new inn said of this as a reply, "My husband is better well engaged and tells the man that he better wish more." The gentleman responds and says, "I wish kindly to speak with one whom is your husband, my lady." "You need to see him in the back room," she said. "Yes, I will meet with Mr. Koch now then, woman." The gentleman, a certain Sir Nicholas, who now owns the estate in 1810, the manor house, the Tide cottages, and the church. He wished to clear up a problem. Sir Nicholas knocks on the door of the room in the darkest part of the new inn. "Open, God damn you!" "Sir Nicholas, you must hurry in." The men face each other and stare. They stare into each other's evil eyes. Very evil eyes. And they stare. Two evil men. Two very evil men. The men face each other. Sir Nicholas now in the room, and Mr. Koch sat behind a very ropely old table. Very plain, no drawers. A dull room with a single pane in the window, with shabby curtains. Speak, my kind sir, asked Mr. Koch. Yes, I shall. Those bodies that keep getting dragged back in by the tide has to stop, you know. Has to stop, says Sir Nicholas. Well, Sir Nicholas, what shall we do with the bodies? Remember, you make a great deal from this trade, don't you, Sir Nicholas of London, of solicitor's practice? Suddenly there's a heavy knock on the door, and Mrs. Koch bursts in. There is a wealthy man waiting in the corridor. Show him, my wife, into the room, the room, the room, the room. Now go. Mrs. Koch scampers out of the room into the corridor and shows the rich gentleman into the room. That room, you all know it, don't you? The room you should never go. That very room. Never go to the room. That very room where we're told not to go when we're children. In the room is a desk, a bed, and lots of bottles of gin. Mark thee gin, whiskey, and the very best wine. No curudha for a gentleman like him. Help yourself, kind sir, to the bottle marked King George's gin. That is our finest. Go, it's a gift from Mr. Koch. Try it. It will see you through the night. Believe my words. Mark my words. It'll see you through the night. You know, that very interesting night. The gentleman says the following. That is very kind of you, madam. Very, very kind. Very, very kind indeed. I will drink to you and your good husband very much now. Thank you very much, kind sir. I will close the door. Enjoy the gin. Remember, King George's gin. I shall leave you be, Mrs. Koch exclaimed to the gentleman. Never go to the room, folks. After an hour, Mr. Koch and Mrs. Koch and Sir Nicholas waits outside the room. Yes, that room. The very room you should wait outside and never go in. Mrs. Koch knocks the door. Knocks it again. And again. And again. And again. And again. There's no answer. The gentleman doesn't answer. All three of them enter the room. The rich gentleman is dead. Poisoned. King George's gin. Have you ever heard of it, any of you? King George's gin? Have you ever tried it out on a relative? I feel it's best avoided. Now, Sir Nicholas, how do we dispose of the body? Mr. Koch explains. Bury him in the field above the inn. My servant will help, exclaims Sir Nicholas, solicitor of London. From that moment onwards, body after body is buried in that field. You know the one, don't you? The field. Also, the field. For the next 15 years, until people stop using the new inn and custom dies. You know, custom dying, just as its patrons used to. A new road is built, and the trading death ends. avoid dark lanes heading to strange little inns. And above all, keep safe. And remember the veil between this world and the next. The next world, the veil is ever so thin. This is KARL-JAMES Langford, and thank you. And we shall see you for our another evening with tales from the crypt. I do hope you have enjoyed. Keep safe, keep merry, and keep happy. I will leave you for a moment. I will cut my mic and I will bring you all back. So don't go away. Mute. Ask to unmute. Ask to unmute. Ask to unmute. Okay. So I will be with you all now, folks. And I know you can hear me.
You can't see. Right. Be really dumb. You gotta be really dumb.
So just a few images for you all.
Start my video. Where's the scarecrow? Scarecrow!
I will be with you now.
Oh, I'm not being funny. What's going on there? Are we on the And what does this say?
Okay, folks, I am back with you.
Right, hang on.
Hello, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Was that suitably dark for you all this evening?
Can you
Good.
see what?
That was good. That was good.
No, I can't.
Good. I'm happy with that.
Stavros, we need you down, your love.
Why do you need Stavros down there?
Oh, damn! I meant the scarecrow.
Oh, right. Okay. Kathy, was that a good birthday treat?
That was so amazing. Thank you so much. You
All
really
the
brought them to life. Well,
We
you
need
brought
to
them
be
to
able to be
death.
seen.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Thank you.
It's good bringing people to death. That's good. That's good.
No,
That's good.
We'll do
don't
it then.
stop pressing
Thank you
the
very much
phone.
for that. I'm going to, what I'm going to do, anyone else, I wasn't going to do this at the end, but thank you very much for that, Kathy. So what we'll do, we'll probably get this as a recording to those that didn't join us, and we'll put this on YouTube in a few weeks' time, but obviously it won't be live, which it was tonight.
I know.
So I'd like to just ask if anyone's got any quick questions. Sophie?
No questions.
Kathy, birthday girl, any questions?
Not really, no. Just I was interested, how long have you been telling these stories? Because you did it really well. Has it been a long time thing for you?
Well, actually, I am actually an actor, but we started Ghost Walks about we started these Ghost Walks about 5 years ago,
Right.
and we did a series of Zoom ghost evenings, but they weren't like this. What I'd just talk about the local area, and we thought we would do this, and we might actually do a few more after this as well.
I love the story element of it. Really, really draws you in. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Amy, is there anything you'd like to say? Remember, we haven't got long, darling.
Nope, nothing. It's all good here, Pat.
And what we're going to do, we're going to get the noisy trio up. You've got to undo your thingamajig. I got to be honest with you, right? Which one is Rosamond? Is it the black one there or the other one?
Rosamond has departed for the evening.
What's that, darling?
The residents of Elm Grove Road are someone else tonight.
Oh, that's
We
good.
thoroughly enjoyed the storytelling.
It's my pleasure.
Can relate.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And what I'm going to do is just quickly show you the stuff from the sponsors again. And I had a little bit of help today off, well, Roxanne Jones, my stepdaughter, did my makeup when we had research from Richard Enos and Michelle Jones, and Mary Trevillion's one of her own stories. So basically we got the research there from Richard and Michelle and wrote four stories from it. And hopefully we'll have a few more of these in the future. And
amazing makeup, darling. Yeah,
it is good makeup, isn't it? It is really good. And obviously I've got a live show next year as well, and classes if anyone else is interested. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stop the sharing, and I'm going to bring us back to the main screen. So if nobody's got anything else to say, I'll send this video to everybody, and thanks for keeping with us tonight. And hopefully the occupants of Elm Grove will come back. I really hope they will.
Well,
Too late.
It's too late. You've killed them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say good night. If nobody's got anything else to say.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Tales from the Crypt over and done. Thank you very much this evening, everybody. So Kathy, good to meet you. Hopefully we'll meet you again. Nice to see you again, Sophie and Tom and Rosamond and Stav and Amy and anybody else who was meant to join us. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
good
Good
night,
night.
all.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye. Night. Night.
Bye bye. Happy
Bye-bye, Kathy,
Halloween.
Amy, Sophie, everybody.
Blessings.
Okay.
You're front in front of the blinking camera, darling.
Take care, darlings. Bye.
Blessings.
Blessings, darling.
Blessings and greetings on this most
Yes, and the
night.
teenagers deserved it.
Yeah, I agree. Flipping heck, that was really
I
dark.
can't speak.
I can't see either. Take care, guys. Bye. So brilliant face makeup. Absolutely love it. And for those that didn't join us tonight, yes, it's been a good one. Thank you very much. Tales from the Crypt, over and out.